G'day all, Benny Reese West. Just going to take a look at uranium, just have a look at some of the evolution of the structure of the stocks, let's just say, since last I put a video out looking at this stuff. So obviously there's been a fair bit going on, especially in the last week, but it does seem to be reasonably contained to CCJ only. So I'm just going to start here with the Sprott, and I think this remains my most likely count. I think what we could just see up close here is that we've had an impulse up here. I mean that's just, to me, is an impulsive move, and then it just looks like we're in the process of putting in this 3 before we go again up here. Now, this sort of movement would fit more with what I'm kind of looking for out of the general market, which would make our little topping action up here. And then I'm expecting we're going to come down and retest down here, maybe more towards the middle of the year, perhaps. But of course, that won't have anything to do with the fundamental outlook for uranium. I think it'll just suffer under the weight of the general market. So, as I was saying, to me, this just looks pretty good for a sort of impulse up here, and then a 3 wave coming back down. So that, in an Elliott wave sense, is basically what you're looking for as one complete cycle before we kick again. 5 up, 3 down, or 5 then 3. So I'm just thinking over the next week or two that we're just going to just come down, just rest. We're just going to come down again. Perhaps we would be thinking something like, well, maybe it's not going to come this deep, but maybe it just comes into test in this range down here. I mean, that's not very far from where we are, of course, but that'd just be the general what I'm expecting to happen in the next week or two before we go up and try to finish this whole movement up here to make this bigger pattern complete. So just to put that in a cyclical sense, I think we've made this top here on the 2nd of Feb. From the 22nd of December, where all the stocks made the lows, up to here. I think this is obviously the daily cycle high, and now we're just seeking a daily cycle low. So I'd suggest that you can probably take this trend line now, and we know we've got our expected, the average cycle length we'd expect around the 3rd of March. So we'll just see. We're now into the zone where we would be thinking that we're ready to make. Let's bring this out to a daily, that we're ready to make our daily cycle low before we kick in again. So that sort of feeds into that Elliott idea that we just get 1, 2, 3 before we kick on again. So that's what I'd kind of be looking for now. We can see the RSI is tailing off down here. So we're just looking for signs that this is going to bottom out somewhere around here and then start to turn back up and possibly diverge on the bottom as we make the cycle low, and then we'll kick up for one more cycle, which, as I said, tying it back to Elliott, would give us our 3 wave move like that. That's kind of what I'm looking for in the medium term. So when we just kick over here to Cameco, CCJ, one thing that struck me here is we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 up weeks, and now we've finally had a down week but obviously you can see after 9 weeks of going up, the market just probably needs a bit of a rest. It'll need to come back down and just chill out for a bit. So whilst I think, and let me just switch back to a different chart. Just coming in here and looking at this, you can just see that the market looks like it's running a bit hot. But I think I'm going to have to change my count up a little bit in CCJ. And I'm really basing that off what the Sprott count's telling me, because I think the way I've got it laid out right now is not going to be the way it's going to evolve. But nonetheless, on the week, I think that's just one thing to just anchor yourself a bit here, because after 9 up weeks, maybe we just need a rest. So I'll just remind you that on the large view, and we're out here on a weekly, that this fractal is, of course, this one here. And that's kind of what I'm thinking we're going to do in the longer term. But as I've said before, I think we may not necessarily do something as deep as this, But what I'm getting at is, I think rather than this, which is what everyone who's long and an Uber bull is hoping for, I think we're more likely to get this sort of thing. Okay, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just more likely. I just think that we're going to get a 3 wave up here rather than this big run. So nonetheless, with that in mind, I'm not sure we're going to go deep like this, but I think we're still going to get more like 3 waves like this. So I think I've said before, when you sort of measure it out, anywhere above this sort of $40 range, when we start coming into sort of this area, if I was a long-term holder, I'd be thinking about taking profit. Well, I'd certainly be on the lookout. So in an Elliott sense, this is how I had been looking at the market. But remember that Sprott, the look at Sprott, it looks like I thought that maybe we'd finished up here and then we were ready to come down. But because of the way that Sprott looks, I'm less inclined to think that this is how Cameco is going to unfold, and what we're actually going to get is more something like that before we come down to do the final test, which means that this is more likely going to have to be the X wave up here, which then kind of makes me think, well, perhaps the W finishes here, and you know, that maybe this will have to be reworked. But I don't think we're in imminent danger of the last retest to make the final low before we make the big push. That's a bit of a mouthful, but I don't think that we're now going to come down like this now. I think that basis Sprott and basis the way that the market looks to me is that we're more likely to do this and then come down. Okay, so we're just going to get. So what that means is that basically this would have to be moved a little bit and reworked. I think this is probably now more likely going to be an A wave, then we get a B wave, then we get a C wave like that, which might mean that the W's here, which means that doing this pretty messily on the fly, that this will be something more like that. You know, that kind of thing is, if it's going to line up with the way everything else is looking, that would be more the sort of count that I'd be looking for. There is, of course, the bullish count, which would have this as an A wave, B, C, D, and then finishing the triangle here for an E, and that would actually be our finishing movement. And then we've come up here. This is, I think it's hard to say that's not an impulse, and that we get a correction before we kick up to make more and then come up and get the C. So I think that this is less likely, because I think that the overall market is not going to allow Cameco to just go extending up this way while everything else is going south. So I keep this up my back pocket as a possibility, but it's not something I'm leaning into. It's not my primary count. So one thing, obviously, we know that this week we had some really good news for Cameco. I'm sure everybody who holds it and all the uranium enthusiasts are very well up to date with some of the good buoyant news that's come out. And that has really held CCJ up, whilst the other stocks, I mean, you can see it in the chart, right? When we just come in here and look at this sort of cyclical point of view, but we know that, you know, Cameco just held up at these highs, even though you can make an argument that it's run out of steam there. But when you look at some of the other stocks, so when we just quickly flick over here to energy fuels, we can see that, you know, it wasn't maintaining up at these highs. It had already moved a little bit lower, and its cycle had already failed. So we knew that we were already looking for a daily cycle low, whereas Cameco was making noises that maybe it hadn't found its cycle high yet. Now, I did muse that perhaps this was a cycle low and we were starting for a new cycle, but it always, to me, felt a little bit like that was a stretch. Basis the way that the overall market was looking, that I don't think that it can hold up. You know, if the S&P is really going to nosedive another 100, 200 points, which I think is, I don't think it's going to do it right now, but it's on shaky ground for the next week before I think it bases and rallies again. We'll just say that. But I think what that means for next week for Cameco is that what we can just expect is that the cycle is going to find its low somewhere in here before it makes the next run. Okay, and that feeds into the idea of that Elliott wave, that we're going to get that 3-wave move. Okay, and then we see. But right now we're sitting right on the average cycle length, okay, which is about 59 days. But that doesn't mean it can't. This one ran 66 days. It can run lower. It's just an expected. It's just an average. It's nothing more. It's just, there's no voodoo or anything like that involved. It's just an average length of time. So, it's reasonable to think that, we've been observing the RSI, which has been diverging. It's just not unreasonable to think that we just come down. We don't necessarily have to get all the way down to these sort of oversold zones, but it just means that the RSI is on its cycle down before it finds a bottom, and then it turns back up again. And when we start to find this bottom, when we start to diverge, wherever it may be, that's when we just sort of start to look for the cycle low. So we're not quite there yet. Maybe, you can see that maybe it makes sense for it to just come down here to $25 odd where this sort of structure is, but that's going to take quite a steep drop from the overall market. It may not get down that low because obviously the news is still there, but I think that the point being is now it's really starting to form up and make a decent case for a cycle high here with good divergence. And now we haven't actually closed below the 10-day MA, but one or two more weekdays start next week, and I'd expect this is going to then start to make its case that the cycle high is in, which I think it is without proof. But the overall market, I think, is just going to lead it down before we bottom, we turn, and then we go on our next run back up. So that's pretty much it. I think we're just in for a bit of a softer week next week. I think the Elliott wave and the cycle analysis are coming together pretty well here. And I think it's not going to be as much about uranium as it's just going to be about overall market dynamics. So I think that's where we sit. A little bit of downside next week, and then I think we start to base out and we get set for the next rally. So that's it. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.